Hey there, it's Christian from 7 Gaming Network, and I'm here continuing our Deck Building 101 series for Star Wars Destiny. Today we're going to look at card selection. How do you make that choice over which cards to include in your deck and which ones not to? So our previous video we looked at the strategy, where you're picking the overall strategy that your deck's working towards. So when it comes to card selection, what you're looking to make sure is that do your cards fit with your strategy? Do they all work towards that strategy that you've got set as the overall aim of the deck? Now, what I'd suggest you do is lay out all of your options. So take all the cards that are potentially available to your deck, lay them all out, and you need to start looking at each of these cards in turn and assessing, is that directly or indirectly, and I'll talk about that next, contributing to me achieving the strategy that I set out to. Now, when I talk about directly contributing to your strategy, what I mean by that is, let's say for instance you're trying to build a fast aggro deck, and you're looking at Holdout Blaster. Well, the Holdout Blaster has ambush, so it makes you faster, and it's a blaster, it deals damage. So it's doing fast damage, which is perfect for an aggro deck. Okay, so that's how you're assessing whether something is sort of directly contributing. Now indirectly, it's a little harder to define, but you might say something like, you know that there's quite a lot of people are also playing fast aggro, and so what you might need then to do is to have some way of staying alive a bit, just so that you can manage to absorb a bit of that damage and still keep chucking out yours. And so indirectly staying alive means you can deal more, helps you to deal more damage, okay? And so therefore you might have the odd card or two in your deck that's going to enable you to, say, put some shields on or to mitigate damage against you. Now that's a whole other area. Perhaps another one you could use is something like if you're building around, say, Crime Lord. Well, Crime Lord is an expensive card in itself, and it needs lots of resources for you to be able to fire it off. So you could say that cards that are building up resources in your deck are indirectly helping you to achieve your strategy win condition, which is kill all the others through Crime Lord. Okay, so you've assessed all you're going through the cards, you're assessing them, you're like, yes, that does, that's in the yes pile. No, that definitely doesn't, that's in the no pile. That one, I'm not sure, it could make 3 piles. So you've got ones that are really clearly helping, the ones that either directly or indirectly, ones you're not too sure about, and then ones that definitely aren't. Now that's probably going to give you a lot more than 30 cards to potentially pick from. And obviously we've got to remember we can have 2 versions of, and there are definitely plenty of cards you're going to go, well, I need 2 of those. Then what I'd say to do is to look through those 2 piles, the definites and the I'm not quite so sure about, and then have a look at in terms of the power level. So you want to make sure that you've got your most powerful cards going into your decks. It's simple, you know, your jetpacks, your Sith holocrons, your holdout blasters, those kind of cards. And what you want to do is hopefully you should be having more cards going into the pool of the definite yeses from that are directly contributing to your strategy than indirectly all the time. Okay, generally. So bear that in mind. Okay, if you've got lots and lots of indirect ones, you might find your deck's a bit slow to achieve what it needs to achieve. You want lots of ones that are really directly contributing to it. Now then, just bear in mind again that you're not just looking at the power of the card, it's how it contributes to your strategy. So a card could be a very powerful control card, and therefore a powerful card, but if you're building an aggro deck, well then that's not going to fit in very well, and it isn't going to feel very powerful in that deck. So make sure that what you're looking at is a powerful aggro card. You know, is it a Kylo Ren's lightsaber or something like that? That's perfect in an aggro deck where you're trying to dish out the damage, but bear in mind that depending on builds, and this is where some of the experience or listening to reviews and stuff can come into play, you could quite conceivably use a powerful card like Kylo Ren's lightsaber in a control deck to be the more controlled, the more nuanced way of dealing out some damage in your deck, or the more focused way of dealing some damage in your deck. So we've got ourselves through a whole bunch of cards. We've removed all the ones that are definitely not helping towards the strategy. So we've selected a bunch of cards that are now, they're definitely powerful cards, and they're either directly or indirectly helping us to achieve our strategy. And then we've got some that we're not entirely sure about. Okay, they may be very powerful cards, but we're not quite sure if they fit in with our strategy. That's fine, because what you're probably finding in those is that there may be some what we'd call meta cards or meta tech cards around. Now, the meta is just what people are playing, what cards and what decks are people playing, and we talk about teching specifically against the meta. So you may find that perhaps, so for instance, in my meta, I've got there's a lot of people with shields, there's a lot of people playing Jedi type decks, and so there's a lot of shields around. So for me, when I'm building a deck, those cards, I'm not quite sure whether they contribute directly towards my strategy or not, but they may be very powerful. Well, if it's a card like, say, Intimidate, which is remove all shields on a character, or it's a TIE fighter to remove shields, or it's an On the Hunt that removes all shields on a character, I'm much more likely to include those cards because they become good meta tech cards for decks that I know I'm going to be going up against. Now, you've got to be careful with how many you put of those in, because of course against some decks Intimidate is going to be completely useless because they just don't run any shields, as a good example. But there's always this built-in thing with Star Wars Destiny, of course, that you can just pitch a card and it's still worth it for the re-roll. One of the great designs of the game. But you're probably going to want something like, in my experience, it's been about 3, 4, maybe 5 very tech-specific cards that you might include, and I mean that total number. You know, so you might have, say, 2 Intimidates, 2 On the Hunts, or something like that. So you've got yourself down to, you're probably approaching something like about 30 cards now. Somewhere between probably 30 and 40 would be my guess. So then what you're looking to do is really start narrowing the pool, because you're trying to get down to that 30 for your deck. Have a look at what the split is across your upgrades, your support cards, and your event cards. Now, just a quick scan through Star Wars SW Destiny DB, or any of the sort of top competitive decks. After the Awakening set, you will find that there is a lot more upgrades and events being played than supports. So if you're looking at your deck and you've got 12 support cards in there, I would suggest that's probably quite a lot. You're going to want more upgrades and more events than you are supports, with how the game is currently running and set up. That may change, of course, in the years to come, but the number of upgrades that you're probably looking to have is, well, I would say the real bottom end is probably 10 in terms of like dice type cards, and upper end is probably maybe 20. I mean, there are that go over that a little bit, that are just pure aggro, trying to get lots and lots of dice out on the table as quickly as they can, with lots of cheap upgrades. But I think for most decks you're looking at somewhere between 12 and 15 upgrades and cards that are bringing dice to the table, which could of course include support dice. So there's a slight bit of crossover there. But you've got to make sure you're bringing enough dice to a game. There's no good having 3 character dice and then only 9 dice sat in your box. I suggest that's going to be a very specific build. I'm not saying that's never going to be the case or never going to be useful, but you've got to make sure you've got enough dice coming to the table. So you've got your upgrades, and you're probably looking at somewhere between 10 to 15 cards for that. You've maybe got a couple of support cards in there, or maybe none, and then you're looking at your event cards, which is again going to round out the deck. So we really should be starting to approach 30 cards by now, because you may be looking at that and going, oh yeah, well, I've actually put out quite a lot of support cards here. I really need to cut down some of these support cards, and that's going to help bring me down to my 30. So the next thing that I want you to start having a look at then is, once you've got it down to about 30, start looking at your cost curve. And what I mean by your cost curve is how many resources your cards cost. So how many cards have you got that cost 0? How many cards have you got that cost 1? How many cards have you got that cost 2, 3, and so on, and above. And what you want to make sure is that you haven't got, you need to have, generally we're looking for a smooth curve. So you want quite a lot of 0s, quite a lot of 1s, you know, a fair few 2s, some 3s, and then you might have 1 or 2 4s, and then if you have any over that, then you've got to really make sure that they are only a small number, a 1 or 2, 3 or 4 if you're building your deck to support cards like the Falcon or the ATST and cards like that. Okay. So as you're looking at your cost curve, then you may well be down to 34 cards or something, and you realise that actually you've got 5 cards that are costing 4, 5 or 6 resources. Well, immediately you've got to cut some of those down, because in a 30 card deck, unless again you're building a deck that's trying to get big stuff out, and that's a very specific strategy, then you can't have too many expensive top end resource heavy cards in there, because you're simply going to struggle to be able to get them out. And remember, Destiny has got this mechanic where you can upgrade. So you can overwrite your upgrades, and that's going to cost you less resources then. So if you've got a good cost curve, it's easy to ramp up, as we say. So you can put a 1 cost upgrade down, and then, hey, great, you can then put a 2 cost upgrade down for the 1, and that means you could maybe put 2 cost upgrades out if you've got 2 1s out, and so on a turn. You can ramp through your upgrades and be building up the relative power level of them. It's really hard to do that if you don't have a good cost curve, because your starting hand, even after mulliganing, and you're thinking, great, I've got three cost upgrades here in my hand. I can't play any of those in the first turn until they even roll a resource. Really not ideal. Okay, so look at your cost curve, and then I would say, like, you're going to be really close to down to your 30 cards. So you should have all the cards should be working towards your strategy, either directly or indirectly. You should have picked your most powerful cards helping that strategy. You may have a little handful of meta cards in there, of cards that you've specifically taken to tech against your meta. Just a few, remember. You will have you split across your upgrades, across your supports and your events, and you'll also have your cost curve smoothed out and made sure that you haven't got loads of expensive cards and not enough cheap cards. And I would say, therefore, there may be a couple of really hard last choices to cut. I usually find the last 2 to 3 cards are the most difficult cards to cut down to get it down to 30. So be ruthless, just go, oh, do you know what, I'm going to get rid of those, get down to my 30, and now play some games. Now, one thing I will say is, and this is dependent a little bit on the deck pool, on the card pool that you've got available, where you can, try and play and build decks around using 2 of 1 card, rather than having lots of 1-ofs. I could probably do a whole video on just on this, but I'm going to chuck it in here now because it really is part of card selection. and that is one of the things that I see a lot of newer players to CCGs doing, is saying, well, I might need this and I might need that, and that could be really helpful and that would be brilliant in this situation, and so on. And then they try and shoehorn in too many different types of cards. And as a result then, when you're playing, your consistency of your deck, it really suffers because of the cards you selected for it. You're never quite sure what your deck's going to give you. And that can make it really mind-bending to play with, because even though you may have set yourself a nice strategy, you're giving yourself so many different options with different cards turning, one-offs all the time. It can be really hard to see how you can fit this particular hand of cards together this turn to make progress towards your strategy. So can I encourage you, if you've got the card pool available to you, is try and use as many 2-ofs as you can of cards that you select. So, you know, rather than mixing it up and having lots and lots of 1-ofs, stick to the 2-ofs, because what's going to happen then is, you know, you're more sure what your deck's going to give you. You know, if you haven't seen a certain card for a little while, you know, as the deck's going on, you can be sure that this card is coming very soon, because you've got 2 of it in there rather than 1. It's a double amount. And what that allows you to do then, of course, is be more consistent in how you try and play to your strategy. When you can see the cards clear in your hand, you get, as you play the deck more, you get used to the combinations of cards that you're going to see, and that helps you to be more reliable. It helps you to play quicker, and that's really important, because then you're going to get less tired and all those kind of things, especially if, and I'm really pointing towards your tournament style deck building here, that's really important. So there's a lot to think on there, but just as a very simple rule, try and keep that 2 cards is better than 2 of 1 card is better than 2 of 2 different cards in most circumstances. Okay, so that's it. Do this. You should get a deck of about 30 cards or 30 cards together. That means you can go and play some games. And once you've played some games and you've done this sort of early part of the deck building process, once you start playtesting your deck, that's to me when deck building really starts. It really gets going, because the fun part and the most involved part is starting to playtest your deck and then starting to make all the little tweaks and changes. Anyway, so hopefully you should be working towards your first deck, or maybe your 10th deck, but you're trying to brush up on it. So get out there, play some games, and then the next video we'll go through exactly what to do once you've played a few games with it and you're starting to make some changes. Okay, so if you want to leave any comments on the video below, you think I've missed something that's really obvious with card selection, brilliant. This is meant to be a resource for especially for new players coming to Destiny, but for old and new alike. So please do stick stuff on the comments there, and if you want to get in touch with me, you can do so through the comments, or you can get hold of me in the Knights of Ren Discord channel. My online handle there is Peace Lord. Anyway, get deck building and keep enjoying Destiny. Until next time.